Okay, here we go. Is this up over here? Okay, yesterday we finished off by discussing that for chulin, if you toivel, if you toivel your hands for chulin, you don't need to have kavanah. But if you toivel for meiser, you have to have kavanah. So the Gemara here asks, Uminot Tamer on the very top line of the daf, Uminot Tamer the chulin loy boy kavanah. How do you know that chulin does not need kavanah? Itnan we learned, gal shenitlash. So someone's in surfing country, and there's a big wave that lifts itself out of the sea. It's a huge wave, and it contains 40 saw of water. And this guy's lying on the beach trying to suntan, and all of a sudden, splash! The nufal al adam, the 40 saw of water falls on this person. V'yala kalim and on kalim, and this person needed tefillah, or the kalim needed tefillah. Tahayin, they're tahar. So zog to Gemara, katani adam domida kalim. The Bryce or the Mishnah is lumping together the halacha of the person with the halacha of the kalim. So therefore, we can equate the two. Malik kalim deloy mechavni. Kalim are inanimate; they definitely don't have kavanah to toivel. Af adam deloy mechavin. So to a man who becomes wet from water, he doesn't have to have any type of kavanah, and he's going to be tahar. Correct Gemara, you don't have a raya from this case. Umimai dilma b'yoshev umitzapa emasa yitlash agalaskina. Maybe this person did have kavanah. Maybe he was sitting there on the beach, he needed to toivel, and he was waiting for a big wave to come over and soak him. The kalim dumid adam. What about kalim dumid adam? What there has to be a comparison of kalim to adam. Yes, we would say ma adam, the bar kavanah, just like a person who is a bar kavanah and he has kavanah to toivel. Af kalim the mechavanlu. So to the kalim, the owner of the kalim placed the kalim there with the intention that the kalim will get splashed with water. Oh, Chabsi, good morning. I already introduced you that you're going to share with us a story about Scheinberg. Okay, so whenever you're ready, we're ready. So,
okay, I didn't for Scheinberg for about 3 years.
He's always ready.
Ready. Listen, the Rav asked me if I have what to say after his drasha. I told him Yosy Simon teaches me a daf a day. I have plenty to say. When Rav Scheinberg came to my father for tuition.
I love the story.
Oh, you know the story?
I love it.
Okay, so I'll say another story.
No, I want to hear the story. I love it. I could hear it 1,000 times.
So Rav Scheinberg came to my father for tuition because he accepted me without, today when you send your son to yeshiva, it's almost like you're buying merchandise to make you feel like it's a business deal. But when I went to yeshiva, they accepted me, and then Rav Scheinberg came 6 months later to America and tried to work out with my father the amount that he should pay. So my father told him that, Rosh Yeshiva, I can't really do much now. My business is suffering. I went bankrupt 2 years ago. So Rav Scheinberg said, listen, at least if you want to, at least give us the amount of money that it would cost you to feed Chaim Tzvi in Toronto. So give that to us. So my father said, and how much is that? So Rav Scheinberg said, I can't, whatever it costs to feed Chaim Tzvi in Toronto for a year, that's what you give us. So my father said, so Rav Scheinberg said, maybe give us $1,200 a year. I forget the amount. So my father said, I don't know, but he gave him a check. He gave him a check for $800. So Scheinberg said, that's it. So my father said, I can't do much. I really can't do more. Maybe I'll send in a little bit more later. So Scheinberg said, listen, I want you to know that a young man came to me last year. Now, this is a story my father told me, right? This really happened. Scheinberg told my father a young man came to him for a bracha for a child. He didn't have a child for 10 years already, and he was the family was very, very agitated. His extended family, everybody was really upset, especially his wife. So I told this young man that if you support one of my Yugalite in yeshiva for a year, I'll give you a bracha. So he says, and how much is that? So he says, it's $500 a month. So the younger man said, listen, $500 a month, I don't have that money. I would have to borrow that money. The Rosh Shiva said, so the Rosh Shiva told my father, and I told him, doesn't matter, to borrow the money. Borrow the money on the yeshiva's behalf. So the younger man said, okay. So the Rosh Shiva tells my father, I want you to know that after 6 months of paying me, of giving me the $500 a month, the younger man came back to me and said, Rosh Shiva, I'm giving you money for 6 months already. It's already, $3,000. And I still don't have any news. So the Rosh Shiva said, don't worry about it, okay? Don't worry about it. And 6 months later, the man had a baby boy.
What does that mean? If she wasn't pregnant, how could she have a baby in 6 months?
She had a baby in 6 months.
How is that possible?
Shragi Palm was born after the 6 months.
Okay.
Okay. Shragi Palm, the Magid Shir in Nachlas Tzvi. So my father was telling one of his friends this story. So the friend told my father, I'll leave his name out because he's still here in Toronto, very well known. He said, why didn't you tell the Rosh Shiva that you would give him a brocha if he would give you $600, $500 a month? But one of the things that I remember the most about Rav Scheinberg is that one time he came in and he was complaining to us Bochrim that we're not treating the Sidorim with proper respect. We're coming late to his shir, especially, and we're just not doing it. And he said like this, I'll never forget. He said, if you Bochrim would know how much I sacrifice for you, right? How much Mesiras Nefesh I have for you, you would never come late. You would never treat the Sidorim the way you do. And that Bein Hazmanim, my cousin Shai Berkowitz from Korn's Bakery went to vacation in a small town in California. And he's in this little shul. There's probably maybe 12 other people. And he looks up and he sees there's a Mashiach coming up, going up and down the aisles with a little pushka. And he looks up and he tells me afterwards, he says, you wouldn't believe who the Mashiach was going up and down the aisles in this little favor in a town in California. I said, I have no idea. Who could it be? He said, well, you're Rosh Hashiva. So now his speech that I had heard, his complaints a couple of weeks ago or months ago, took on a whole new meaning. I started to realize that the Rosh Hashiva really runs around the world and breaks his back and and does whatever it could to get a couple of pennies, to get a couple of dollars, just to keep his yeshiva going. So his school should be and
his name is Chaim Pinchas Noat. Remember his father's name?
His father's name was
I'll call Yisrael. They probably know him by name up there.
They know him by his palace.
Yeah. To be sure. Also, our learning should be a source in the Refuah Shalema, where all the Chayla amongst us, Shimon, Yehuda, ben Rivka, Yaakov, Shmuel, ben Chana, Yisrael, Moshe, ben Yenta Gittel, Shimon, ben Chasya, Bechol, Besoich Shar, Chayla, Yisrael, and Elio, Shraga, Fivish, ben Esther. It means a big Refuah Shalema.
Who's Elio Shraga?
I got into trouble with Moshe Ben Sarah because I once said it while Moshe Ben Sarah was on. So I had to bite my tongue for a second.
Yosy, who's Elio Shraga?
And all the Eden in Europe who are in grave danger, the Rebbeinu Shalom should provide them with a secure shield to shelter them from any type of harm.
Amen. Yosy, who's Elio Shraga?
Elio Shraga ben Esther is Eliyahu Weinstein. He's in. I know over Shabbos he was in the ICU. So the Gemara says the Gemara is looking for a makar that for chulin you don't have to have kavanah when you toiv it. So the Gemara at first thought we can extract that information from the case of gal shenitlash u'boy abarim saw if someone was splashed by a wave and a person or either a person or a keli, Metaher them. So the Gemara wanted to bring a raya on the fact that we're comparing an Adam to a Keli, it's obviously a case without Kavanah. So the Gemara says, no, Fakert. Maybe you both did, you had Kavanah side by the Adam and side by the Kalim. The Adam had Kavanah to be Metaher himself, when he saw that wave coming, and he placed the Kalim there with the Kavanah on behalf of the Kalim, that the Kalim should become Tahar when they get splashed with the wave. But if you're going to say that that doesn't make sense to say that that's Pshat in the Mishnah, because if that was Pshat in the Mishnah, my remember, what Chiddush is it that someone who toivels with Kavanah is going to be Tar? If the purpose of the Bryce is to teach us that just like Kalim don't have to have Kavanah, so too a person doesn't have Kavanah. So that's a very nice Chiddush that the Mishnah is telling us. But if we're saying in each case there is Kavanah, so then what is the whole Chiddush of this Mishnah? So Dr. Gemara is a huge Chiddush here. So kedaita chamina likzer dilma also lemitzel bechardel shel geshamim. What is occurring over here? There's a wave coming from overhead and landing on you. That wave is a shtickle mobile. That's similar to a chardel shel geshamim. A chardel shel geshamim. Let's see what that is, because this opens up a whole big sugya. So let's see what Rashi says. Chardel is a stream of water. Imagine it's pouring raining and there's a huge body of water that's rolling down the mountain. It contains 40 saw, but it's actually rolling down the mountain. And if you toivel in a mobile body of water, so this is not a river or a spring, it's just a big blotch of water that's rolling down the mountain. It's attached to the ground. Yeah. Also loy tefillah. It would not be a good tefillah. And Rashi offers two reasons why it wouldn't be a good tefillah. Number one is mishum de makom katafris, who it's on an incline. It's on an incline, which means makom zoker yoiser midai. It's quite an incline. Varbam sa shaboy einon b'makom echad. And therefore we say the Arba'am Sah is not contained in one mikvah, it's not in one place. And therefore, we don't say that there's a one full set of 40 Sah combined here.
So Rashi is assuming that there isn't that much water, but what happens if there is that much water?
There's never that much water in the place where you actually are at that moment.
Maybe the water is 4 foot deep.
So I guess when it's rolling down the mountain, it's probably typically not a chardless is typically not that deep. Utanana we learn hanitzuk lakatafris. If something is flowing on an incline, einei chibur, it's not connected. So that's problem number one. In this case, it's a wave that's not on an incline, so it wouldn't be an issue. But it's similar to that. And in a case where there was rain or water rushing down a mountain, and you told them part of it, we don't look at all of the water there that it's contained as one body. That's problem number one. Problem number two is the af im einoi katafris nami ein toivim. Even if this wasn't a problem of all the water being connected, and it wasn't running down the mountain, it wasn't on an incline, it still would be a problem. The second problem is lefisha ein megishamim mitarin derech zechilasan. Rainwater will not be mitar when it's flowing at you nikvin derech hashbayim until it's gathered together in a container and it's not moving. So there are two types of tefillas. There's a tefillah b'mei mikvah that the Torah teaches us about, and there's a tefillah b'mei ma'ayin, a spring. A spring is flowing water. When you toivel in a spring, there's two kulas. A is it doesn't have to be stationary water. It was very hot. It doesn't have to be stationary water. It can be flowing water. Anybody who ever went into the Arizal's mikvah, it's not a very big mikvah. But even if it wasn't 40 saw, even if the place where you toivel wasn't 40 saw, that wouldn't be a problem because you're actually being toivel in an active spring. And when you're toiveling in a ma'ayin, it's going to be matar even if there's no 40 saw, and even if the water is flowing. But a mikveh that's flowing would be a problem. That's why there are Gemaras that discuss how, I think it was Reb Chia or Reb Chisda used to make mats for his daughters to toivel in the river. And there's a discussion there in the Gemara that in a case where there's more megishamim than spring water, because there's bodies of water that are partially spring fed and partially fed by the runoff from the melting snow off the mountains around. So if the main source of water is rainwater, then if it's flowing in a river, you cannot toivel it. You could only toivel in rainwater if it's stationary, contained. If it's spring water, then you could toivel in something like a river, even though it's flowing. So Rashi's telling us over here that if someone toivels in this wave that splashes on him, we would be geyser. Maybe you would have a havmin to say you would be geyser not to let him toivel, because it's like he's toiveling in flowing rainwater, and flowing rainwater will not be mitayr. Kamash Malana, that our Mishnah that it is a good feeling. The Tanya B'Toras Kanim, mama ayin mitayr b'zoichlin af mikveh mitayr b'zoichlin. The Gemara asks, the Medrash in Toras Kanim asks, if ma'ayin is matar even though the water is flowing, maybe a mikveh could also be matar when the water is flowing. Talmud Leimer, ach ma'ayin ubar mikveh mayim yetar. So the pasuk is listing off the ma'ayin and the bar mikveh mayim yetar. And we darshan hama'ayin matar b'zoichlin. The ma'ayin, because it seems like the pasuk separates the two. So ma'ayin is matar even though the water is flowing. The mikveh is only going to be matar b'ashpurin if it's stationary. Rabbeinu Hai Gar is hardeless and not chaydeless, because I think Rabbeinu Hai was from Hungary. So he's Gar is hardeless and not chaydeless. I think that's Salvash bird still, yeah.
And the wave also basically.
That's right. This one splashes around a little bit. It's landing on me, so it's not a problem. So there's a lot of Torah about this, because actually there's one shaila is that, are we talking here about a ma'ayin? This gal shenitlish min hayam, is the yam considered a ma'ayin, and therefore it would work even though it was zeichlin, or is the yam not considered a ma'ayin and is not matar b'zeichlin? Now, from Rashi, who uses the problem of zeichlin to describe this situation, it would seem that it's not considered a ma'ayin, it's considered a mikveh. So Tosfos says, Pirush Rashi, about what a chardalus is. So Yeredes mihar gavaya, the yesh ba memsa, it has 40 saw. But also sham tefillah. In a chardalus, you wouldn't be able to complete a tefillah. Why? The katafris ain't a chibur, because since it's flowing, it's not considered a chibur. It's not. We don't consider it like one body of water because it's flowing on an incline. But a repirish v'chein kasav b'chame perushim. So Rashi, the apostle mitam bein mikveh matar b'zoichlin alabash shporin, which is Rashi's second shot. The Tanya B'Toras Kahanim umiyu aimer harabel chanim al korchav tam rishon nikra. The reason must be the first reason, not al zoichlin is a problem of chaydelis. The problem must be because we don't consider it as 40 saw contained in one place. Because it's moving around. There's nothing holding it together. That's right. Because Rinon, Begal Shal Yam, we're being geyser a Gal Shal Yam. The Imishum Zechila, if the problem is al Zoichlin, Oz B'Shal Yam Mahani. We know that there is no psul of Zoichlin by a Yam. So how could you be geyser a Gal Shenitlas Min a Yam? Should be a problem because it's Otu. Chaydelis is not speaking by a Yam, because if the Chaydelis was in a Yam, it wouldn't be a problem of Zoichlin. But if the problem is because you don't have 40 saw, then it makes sense that we would compare the Yam to a Chaydelis of Megisham. Unless we learn like Reb Meir, who holds that Kol Yamim Kemikvah. Reb Meir held that all of the bodies of water are not a ma'ayin, they're mikvah. So you see, there's questions about here. But there's another problem. And that is, if a ma'ayin doesn't need 40 saw, it's a big machlokes to show them if a ma'ayin would need 40 saw. But if it doesn't need 40 saw, so then katafresh shouldn't be a problem either. The same way Tosfos has a kasha that if it's a ma'ayin, zoichlin isn't the problem, so then 40 saw shouldn't be a problem. But in fact, most Rishonim learn that even though you don't need 40 saw, you definitely need enough to toivel an adult. So The reason why it says Gal Shanitlash Abarim saw is because we're talking about an adult and he happens to need that much water. And if you don't have the 40 saw altogether, it wouldn't be good to toivel a full adult.
As an aside, 40 saw is about 150 gallons.
Right?
150 gallons is very similar to the gas tank that is at the side of a semi-truck. If you ever stand inside next to a semi-truck.
That's 40 saw.
40 saw.
Interesting. Okay, very good. Something you think I could fit into the gas tank of a semi truck?
You think people would want to put you there?
Okay, so that's the first thing that they would be exerted for. But there's another similarity to something else that we also would have having to be goyish for. Inami nigzer Russian auto keeping. We're afraid that if we say that you could toivel when a wave splashes on you, you might also allow someone to toivel something in midair in the crest of the wave. And Rashi says, Russian, echad me Rashi hagal, one of the ends of the wave, when it splashes on the ground. That it's mutter, but you might say that we won't allow you to toivel there, or to keep in, which is shagal, which is the top of the crest of the wave. So Aymin Ba'aber come in kipa. That is in midair. Imagine you have a surfer and the wave is over his head, and he holds up a keli into the wave that's over his head in midair. Would that toivel? That would not work. And you toivel them in that airborne body of water, the wave, ain't a tefillah, it wouldn't be a tefillah to the mafarish bazar. So you might think that you don't let anyone toivel in a wave at all because someone might toivel in the wrong part of the wave. Kamash malon, that it's a good tefillah. Itnan, we learned matbilin baroshin. You're allowed to be toivel when the wave crashes down on you. Ve'ein matbilin bekeeping, but you cannot toivel something in midair. Ve'ein matbilin ba'aver. You can't toivel in the air. So Amr Torah mikvah shall aver l'tefillah. The Torah never said that an airborne mikvah is good for tefillah. Correct. You would not be Torah. You have to let the wave splash on you while you're standing on the ground. That's right. That's right. So there's actually a very big shaila, and that is, are you? Well, first of all, we didn't yet prove that the toivel for chulin doesn't need kavana, but we are going to succeed in proving it. So just in general, talking about not needing tefillah, not needing kavana for tefillah, has some very, very huge halachic impacts. One of the big impacts is something we discussed a little while ago, where somebody, a girl, was considering marrying a boy, and the boy was from a family who wasn't from when he was conceived, and she was concerned that the Vlad is pogum because maybe this child, maybe this boy that she wanted to marry is the son of Anida, right? And therefore, the Vlad, he's pogum. So Reb Moshe, with his Breita places, said that we don't need to be, if he's someone with midas toivos, it's not a question of amzeris, it's a question of pegima. If it's someone with midas toivos, you can assume it's not pogum, and chances are the mother was tahar at the time because she would have been in a swimming pool, and even though she was wearing a bathing suit, she's not a chatzitza. So you see from Reb Moshe's psak over there that you definitely don't need to have kavana when a woman toivos in the mikvah. Of course, it's best that you should have kavana, but you don't have to have kavana, and it's going to be 100% a good tefillah. It's relevant in another place. Can a goy do tefillah's kelim for you? Imagine a caterer buys thousands and thousands of dishes. Can he have his goyim do the tefillah's kelim? The halach is he could. Good. A goy can do tefillah's kelim. He's not neman, so it has to be supervised. A goy is not believed to say that he toiveled all the kelim, but a goy could toivel the kelim. The yid has to supervise him and make sure that it was done. And the only thing that we lose if the goy does the tefillah's kelim is the bracha, right? You cannot make a bracha on a ma'aseh mitzvah of a goy. But if you do some, because normally you don't make a bracha on every kelim, you do some, and then you have to go the rest.
You
You can make the bracha too. I hear.
the supervisor, the mashgiach there have to watch each keli, how it's done?
I don't know. But a guy is not Nemon, so you have to. It would have to be a way where you know for sure it was done properly, right? Maybe even a video. I don't know. The other place, you just undid someone's business. This is someone who has a business entitled to you. The other, it's called dumb conditions. The other, there's someone who has a business called dumb conditions. Yeah. The other shaila is Micah. Vasisa Micah legagacha. So what if you don't know how to build fences? I don't know how to build a fence. So are you allowed to hire a guy to build a fence for you? So again, you're makaim l'shasam davim b'veisecha. You hire a guy, but the mitzvah asiyah vasisa Micah legagacha, and the bracha that you would want to make on it, you could only make if you actually make it yourself. So there's many mitzvahs that the mitzvah is more about the result, and you don't have to have kavanah. Kavanah is not matter.
In 2002, Dov Kamenetsky asked me to go up on his shver's roof because there was an issue over there, and I went up there and I found a fence posts and I found fences and boards, and I asked him, why is all this garbage up there? And he said, no, his father wanted to make a mic over there to be able to make a brocha, so there were remnants of the mic in 2002 up there.
So you told me it was collapsed. It was a collapsed fence or extra materials.
Now is a tripping hazard on the roof.
By the time I came, it was already a room,
Uh-huh.
but it was there because Moshe Zolti wanted to have the mitzvah of mic.
It's close to having a line. Gewaltig. See, Moshe Zolti was always very concerned about the safety of the roof. He was always worried about the roof. That is him. He's taking it all in. Zog the hele gemor weiter. Ella, mehadit. So we're looking now for another proof that when toivel for chulin doesn't have to have kavanah. Ella mehadit nan. Perish and napu v'soich amasamai. What happens if there's a little brook of water and someone dropped perish in there? Now there is a halacha when it comes to tumas oichlin. A fruit could become tummy. We even learned yesterday that a fruit is not limited to becoming a rishon. A fruit could even become a sheni, a shlishi, or a revi when it comes to tumas, the weaker tumas. But a fruit cannot become tummy unless it first came into contact with a liquid. The pasuk says, "V'chiyutan mayim al zara." If water is placed on a seed, on a fruit, then it could become tummy. The pasuk says. Correct. Now, v'chiyutan means if water happens to be placed, not that you had to place it yourself. If it happened to have gotten wet, it could become tummy. However, yutan normally would be spelled yud vav taf nun. This yutan is spelled yud taf nun, and it has those three dots. That's called the malupim, I think. The three dots under the yud and the diagonal. So it's written yite, but it's pronounced yutan. So we learn yutan dumya dechiyite, meaning that even though you don't have to physically place water on the fruit to make it eligible to become tamei, if water falls on it, it will make it tamei anyway, but it has to be that you're happy that the water fell on it. So for instance, if I have fruit that were drying, I don't want them to get wet. And it rained, those fruits are not hushul kabotoma because I definitely didn't want them to get wet. But if I had fruits that I was happy that they got wet, and they got wet by themselves, I didn't put the water in them, those fruits would be mushul kabotoma.
Yutan means that you did it.
Yutan means it happened. Yitain means you did it. So it's spelled yitain, but it's pronounced yutan. So therefore we say that even if the water fell and it perished by themselves, as long as the biome is happy with it, that would make it the hushul kabotoma. Now, the type of liquid that has to come into contact with this peri is water, is obviously one of them, but there's actually 7 type of mashkas, and we know the 7 mashkas from the 3 words yad, shachat, dam. Right? So yad is spelled yudalad, which stands for yayin and dam. Shachat is shin ches tes. So shin stands for shalag, snow, right? Ches stands for chalav, milk, and tes stands for tal, which is dew. And then dam, we already had dam on the first dalad. So the second dalad is, I think, Dvash maybe, and Mem stands for Mayim. So those are the different mashkas that have to come into contact with a fruit in order for the fruit to be able to be makabel tum.
You have to be happy for it that it's happening, or you have to say that I don't want it to be.
Do you want to know what would be if you're neutral about it? I'm not sure. So perish shenaflu l'toich amasamai. Fruit fell by mistake into a brook of water. Upashat mi sheyadav tmeyos v'notbod. And someone whose hands were tamei went to take the pears out of the water. He didn't want to get his hands wet, and he definitely didn't want the pears to be wet. But since the pears fell in, he reached in to get those pears out. So his hands were toivel inadvertent. The loch is yadav tahiros. His hands are tar, so you clearly see he was toivel his hands without kavanah to be metar them, and they become tar. So here's our proof that for chulin you don't need to have kavanah. And uperes einon b'chiyuta. They're not hukshul l'kabaltum. Let's see Rashi. Yadav tahiros alpha b'shaloi neschaven. That's the whole purpose of why we're quoting this price. Uperes einon b'chiyutan be'inin gabe hechsher yutan dum yodechiyite ninichaloi. And he's not happy. He didn't want to get his hands wet, but the pears fell in, so we had to take them out. However, but what if when he reached out to get the pears, he said, "Hey, you know what? I want to rinse my hands. So you know what? Since I want to rinse my hands, I'll get the pears out, and while I'm rinsing my hands, I'll get the pears out." So there, he wanted his hands to get wet. So then Yadav Tahir, his hands will still be tahar because you don't need kavanah to toivel. Here, you have kavanah to put his hands in the water, but the pears are in b'chiyutan. So the question is, I don't understand. I still didn't want the pears to get wet. So why are the pears b'chiyutan? So let's see Rashi. If he only went to get those pears out of the water because he actually wanted to rinse his hands, and he figured I'm rinsing my hands anyway, so I'll take the pears out. Then and from moving forward, these pears will be makabel tumah. His hands won't be makam with them because when he puts his hands into the water, his hands become tar until he gets to the pears. Since he wanted to rinse his hands, Goli daite the nichele bahachnafila shal yadei hediach yadav. Since he wanted to rinse his hands, and he sort of was looking for an excuse to rinse his hands, the pears, he's happy that the pears fell into the water because the pears generated that pretext, that excuse for him to stick his hands into the water. So that's enough. So it's a very subtle willingness for the pears to get wet. Here, he's only happy because he wants to rinse his hands anyway, so it works out to be convenient for him. That's enough to say it's bechiyuta. But the main point that the Bryce, the Gemara wants to illustrate, is you don't have to have kavanah when you're being toivel your hands. Okay, Zok Gemara. Now it's smooth sailing. It's a small almond base, so we'll shoot to get to the end of the plot. If someone was toivel for chulin, I believe this is our Mishnah. The huchsak l'chulin. The halach is it's still asur l'maiser. So Zok Gemara, we can be medayik huchsak in, Allah huchsak loy. Clearly, you had to have kavanah to toivel for chulin. And if you didn't have kavanah to be toivel for chulin, you would not be huchsak l'chulin. So you have a raya that you have to have kavanah when you toivel for chulin from our very Mishnah. Zok Gemara loy. I'm sorry, the halchik amar. You don't have a raya. So when the Mishnah says it's not telling you that if it wasn't you wouldn't be Torah b'chulin. You'd be Torah b'chulin anyway. It's just saying that even if it was b'chulin, it's still asher l'maiser. Correct the Gemara Asa, you can't learn that shot because the end of the Mishnah says tov v'lo huchsak kilo lo tova. The Mishnah says if you didn't have any kavanah for tefillah, so kilo lo tova laral. So my love, kilo lo tova klal. So you see that you need to have kavanah when you toivel even for chulin. So the Gemara loy kilo lo tova l'maiser. It just means that if it's tova v'lo huchsak, it's as if you didn't toivel for the purposes of maiser. Avol tova l'chulin. But it's still a good feel for chulin. So that's a very interesting type of teretz because it's not mashma so much like that. So Zok to Gemara, who savar, Rab Nachman thought dochi kamatchele. He thought so. Rabbi asked Rab Nachman the kasha. And Rab Nachman slugged him up. So Rabbi thought that Rab Nachman was pushing him off because it's a stickle dochak the teretz. But then nafak dok va'ashkach. Then he went out and he looked for it and he found the Tanya tava v'loy huksak. If you toiveled and you don't huksak at all, it's only asal l'maiser, but it's still mutter l'chulim. So this changes how we understood the Mishnah. When we learned the Mishnah, we thought that if you didn't have kavanah for tefillah, for chulin, it's not even Torah for chulin. But here we're saying it is Torah for chulin. What is this funny lotion of nafak? He went out, duck, he checked, va'ashkach, and he found. So I know what Pshat is. If anybody is ever in the Besmedrus here, late after Ma'ariv, 10:30, you'll often find Rebbeim from Rabbi Kaplan's yeshiva, and Rebbeim from the Mesivta. They're coming here to use the Mesivta Gemara and the ArtScroll Gemara and the Charusis, the Gemara, all the learning aids. They come and learn them to prepare for Shir. If sometimes you come before Shachris or even a little bit during Shachris, there's one of the Ramim of the Mesivta of the Mesivta who's learning in the Mesivta, looking up these Farim. What shot? Why can't they do that in yeshiva? The teretz is because they're going to pull out an ArtScroll Gemara in yeshiva. They don't even let ArtScroll Gemara in yeshiva. They're going to pull out a Mesivta Gemara in yeshiva? No. So therefore, they have to leave the yeshiva to come to the Agura. Nafak, he left Dok Vashka. So you're thinking that, Simon's making a joke. I'm not making a joke at all. As a matter of fact, when Mishnais used to be only learned by heart, it wasn't written down. And if someone didn't know, eventually it was written down. But the Choshev Talmidei Chachamim, they wouldn't look at an ArtScroll. They wouldn't look inside the Mishnais. We're supposed to know it by heart. Now, at that transition, when the Mishnais were written down, the big Talmidei Chachamim didn't need it written down. They were supposed to know the Mishnais. So it was embarrassing for someone to admit that he might know the Mishnais. Well, he might not know the Mishnais. He has to look inside. So the Mepharshim tells it's Nafak Dok V'Ashkach. He didn't go into the Mishnais in front of everybody and pull out a Mishnais. No, he went to the Agudah at night after Ma'ariv when no one was looking. And there he pulled out of the Mishnais. And Taki found, he learned what he had to do. So this Nafak Dok V'Ashkach, I'm not making fun of the Rebbeim that come here. They're doing exactly what the Tanoim and Amoraim used to do. They were Nafak Dok V'Ashkach. They know it's not appropriate that they should show that they need to use the ArtScroll or the Mesivta. So they come here.
This is your show, right? So you can have your interpretation.
No, I saw this brought down, actually. I saw the Mesivta brings it down. The Mesivta brings it down. Not over here. Sure. Now it's a Choshev Sefer. No, that's right. Yeah. That's right. The Tanya, we learned. Amar B'Losher. He's Tahar. He's Tahar. He's Tahar for Chul. So Amar B'Losher. Tav of Allah. Okay, now we got to move. Tav of Allah. Machzik Atzmoi L'chol Mashiyirta. What if someone was Toivel and he didn't attribute his tefillah for any specific purpose? So he could say, my tefillah should be for kachim even. Now, until it's identified what it was for, he can identify what it's for. The problem is, this must work a little. The Kernari says this must work with a shikol breira, because I'm saying now what was before, and Tosfos injects a very important piece of information. Tov all of the small little Tosfos in the middle, voidenu lach. You have to say he was still wet from the mikveh, because if he's dry already, the tefillah is over. You cannot identify what the tefillah would be for. So zok to Gemara weiter. Zok to Gemara weiter. Yeah, I'm gonna come. Zok to Gemara. Mesa. If one of his feet is still in the water, then huchzak ledavar kal. If he was already huchzak for a davar kal, like for chulin, machzik atzmoi ledavar chamer. Then it's still considered like the tefillah is in progress. So since he's in the middle of toiveling, he can also say, no, I want it for kachim as well. But Allah, once he's already out of the mikveh, shuv eina machzik. Then he cannot change what the purpose of his tefillah was for.
Wouldn't that conflict with what the Tosfos just said that it's love?
Well, that's exactly what we're discussing. That's exactly what the Gemara's kash was. My love ain't a machzik klal. So it's kloimer ben sheichzik atzum shasfila b'davar kal ben shaloyizzik atzum leklum shuv eina machzik. Right. That's exactly what the Gemara is asking. You have a raya that in fact it doesn't work. The Gemara law, that's not what it means. Rather, if he still has 1 foot in the water, even though he already determined that my tefillah was for chulin, he could now change and say, he could upgrade his tefillah and say it's for kachim. But Allah, once he's already out of the water, im loy huchsa, if he had not yet identified his tefillah for anything, then machzik. As Rashi says, im loy huchsa, with shum davar. If he didn't toivel, if he didn't identify his tefillah was for any specific purpose, shetavel stam, then machzik l'chol mashayirta, it's still fair game to make his tefillah apply to anything he wants. But if he already identified that I'm toiveling for chulun or for meiser, and the mosuk l'chamer, he can't upgrade his tefillah that it should work for truma or kachim. So integrated over kala, his tefillah has already been connected to a purpose. Zok to Gemara, im loy huchtak machzik v'muchzik machzik. Man Tana, who is the Tana who holds that ideyu ragle achas b'mayim? Who holds that if he has the mishuma idenu b'mayim choshev like tchilas tefillah b'al b'shosuk machzik? Who's the Tana who holds that if your foot is still in the water, we still consider it a tefillah in progress and everything is still fair game? Amar Padas Rabbi Yehuda. That Tana would be Rabbi Yehuda. It's not we learned. Mikvah shenimda, that they measure the mikvah, v'yesh by arboim sa mechuvamis. It has exactly 40 saw in it. That means the moment it loses a drop, it's a pasul of mikvah. V'yardu shnaim, and two people went to toivel. V'tovlu za achar za. They toiveled one after the other. The first one in the mikvah, and as the first one was on his way out of the mikvah, the second guy went into the mikvah. Or harishan tar, the first one is tar, because when he went into the mikvah, it had 40 saw. V'asheni tamei, because the first guy definitely took out some water with him. But Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, if the second fellow didn't leave the mikveh yet, his body is still connected to the water, then afasheni tar, we say good achas, we say all the water that's on the body of this person is as if it's in the mikveh. And therefore, the mikveh is still a good mikveh, it still has 40 saw. So Amar Rab Nachman, so you see here, you see this fact that the Raglav Sharisha Noiges B'mayim, you see Rabbi Yehuda's shita of good achas, you look at the water like it's still in the mikveh. Therefore, if he's half out of the mikveh, but his feet is still in the mikveh, you look at it like he's still in the mikveh, and therefore it's still considered that's tefillah in progress.
Sorry, just according to Rabbi Yehuda, is the second guy's whole body has to be in the water in order for it to be tar, or just not? Or
the second guy, in order to toivel, he has to be fully immersed.
Yeah, okay.
But we consider it like there's 40 saw there because the first guy's body is still connected. So Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Hua, Machloikis b'mailas the Rabbanon. The whole Machloikis between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon, whether or not it helps if the feet are still connected, is only by a tumah that's a tumah the Rabbanon. But if we're talking about a real tumah that he's toiveling for, divrei hakol, everybody holds hasheni tumah. Behind the Rav Padas, and that's why Rav Padas said that our Gemara here is only going according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rashi is behind the Rav Padas. The ukilo il, Rav Padas said a moment ago, ha doideu, the fact that if the first guy's feet are still in the water, he first of all, he could identify himself that the tefillah is for anything, and the second guy is still tar, would be consistent with Rabbi Yehuda, not according to Rabbanon. Alma, you see, the Rabbanon, our discussion here is Lagabe Tumah de Rabbanon, and you see that the Rabbanon hold that even for a Tumah de Rabbanon that wouldn't work, because how do we know we're discussing an issue of Tumah de Rabbanon? The Chazaka, the Amar Hochzuk Lakal, also the Chamar Milas. This whole thing that you have to have a specific Kavanah. If you had Kavanah for Meiser, it doesn't work for Truma, that's only Midir Rabbanon. And you see that this Machloikis is even impacting other Rabbanon, because Rav Das said that it only is consistent with Rabbi Yehuda and not Rabbanon. So the Rabbanon must argue even by the Rabbanon. But Ikadami, Amar Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Machloikis mitoma l'tayra. The Machloikis as to whether or not you say good achas is only by a real tumah. But if it was only a question of the Rabbanon, everybody holds it will be tar, and then if we the Rav Das, because based on this, even the Rabbanon would agree that this would work. Amrullah, boy minim Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda asked a shayla from Rabbi Yehuda. The first guy who's leaving the mikveh, he's still connected to the mikveh, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda, the second guy was still in 40 saw. So how about if I have a needle? Could I put it into the wet hair of the first guy who's in the mikveh, and say that the needle is also in the mikveh? There, you have to say good asik. Good asik means you look at the water that's on his body is in the mikveh. Now, we want to say like the water that's in the mikveh is in his head, right? So do you say good asik? Good aches is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds that the water on his head, you look at it like it goes down and joins the mikveh on the bottom. but good asik Leslie. But who said you look at it like the water in the mikvah is up in his hair? Oidilma, good asik nami Yisli. The elevator doesn't just go down, the elevator goes up as well. Amar Tinitua. We have a brisa that actually discusses it specifically. These are lam d'sha'ifan. So it's not a question of being connected. You actually look like it's in 40 saw, right? Shalish gamamiyos benachal. There was an incline, and there were three little indentations in the ground in this incline. There's the top, the bottom, and the middle. The two outer ones, the upper one and the lower one, each had 20 saw in it. And the center one had 40 saw in it. And there's a little bit of stream of water running from one indent to the other indent. So the question is, are they joined? Rabbi Yehuda says, Meir Haya Aimer, Meir said, Matbil be'al yoina, you can toivel in the al yoina only. Perfect Gemara, Vatanya, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, we learned that the Brisa says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Meir Aimer, Matbil be'al yoina, Vani Aimer, we have to change the girsa. Vatanya, Meir Aimer, Matbil be'al yoina, and Rashi says, Meir Haya Aimer, Matbilin be'al yoina, Bani Aimer b'tachtoina v'loy be'al yoina. So let's have a look. The first issue that the Gemara wanted to say is Tnitua. Where do you see it? You see it because you have these three bodies of water, and it says that you could connect them. So if you say that they're all connected, if you say the Matil be'al yoina, so you clearly say good asik as well, because you look at the lower puddle as if it's in the upper puddle, and that's why you're allowed to be toivel be'al yoina. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda said, so you see, you only say good aches and not good asik. So I'm going to Tanya. If you actually have a brisa that says so, I'm not going to be able to argue. Zok the Gemara. Who is our Mishnah going like? It must be going according to Rabbanan, the Shani Lahu Ben Chulun Lamaiser. Because our Mishnah says that if you're Hochsek for Chulun, you're not Hochsek for Meiser. So, which means Meiser is a level up from Chulun. Aim a Sefer. Let's look at the Sefer of our own Mishnah. It says, Big Day Amaretz, Medrash LaPrusin. The Big Day Amaretz are Medrash for Prusin, and Big Day Prusin are Medrash L'Oich L'Trum. And the Big Day Prusin are Medrash L'Oich L'Trum. I'm sorry? And it skips Meiser. Exactly. So it seems like there is no separate level of Meiser. Dr. Gemara, let's say that's going to Reb Meir. The Amar Chulanu Meiser Kadadingenu. The Sefer that skips the level of Meiser is going to Reb Meir, who hold that Chulanu and Meiser are on the same level. The more ratio Rabbanan the Sefer Reb Meir. Are you going to say that the ratio is going to Rabbanan where Meiser is a distinct level and the Sefer is going to Reb Meir? That's exactly what we're going to say. Ratio Rabbanan the Sefer Reb Meir. Abacha Be'ad Amar Masni La B'Sefer. He learned the Mishnah differently in the Sefer, and he learned Chamish Milas. He actually did stick in the extra level of Meiser, Umikla Kula Karbanan, and he learned that the whole Bryce is going according to Karbanan. Okay, let's stop here. Shkoyach.
Ask if you were okay, because when I said that it was 150 gallons.